Okay, so looking at World War II. Now, for most wargamers, World War II is kind of the Grail era. And unfortunately for me, I liked World War II a decent amount in terms of an interesting study field until I got into wargaming, which is a fairly young age, but still. I could remember looking at the books on World War II and being excited about, especially the Pacific War, believe it or not, but also the political occurrences in Europe. I became less interested in the Pacific War and very much more so in the European theater. But overall, just being in gaming, I got drawn away from the World War II games. I'm not sure why. Things like Panzer Blitz and Panzer Leader and Squad Leader drove me away from it with their kind of abstract, this is not a battle. I didn't have some clear, real battle to fixate on and to understand and to picture the soldiers going forward. Instead, I had these kind of engagements that felt kind of like an SFB type game. Now, I like SFB, so why didn't I like Squad Leader? Why didn't I like Panzer Leader? And I did to some extent, but they just never caught me in the same way, and I'm not sure why. Some of it's probably the Avalon Hill rulebooks, especially for those three games. I did not find them terribly appealing. But it was even in the strategic stuff that I shied away a little bit. I wanted Third Reich so badly. But then when playing it, I ended up playing War and Peace more often. The operational level, well, I'm never a big fan of operational anyway, but again, I found myself shying away from the games that had the operational level. Some of them seemed too simplistic, and I'm finding that I'm enjoying things like the operational combat system a little bit more, just like I enjoyed Desert Fox significantly more than a lot of the other operational games. See, some of them, though, were a little too complex for me, and in particular, I'm thinking here Ramaletia and Tunisia, which left me with decisions that I couldn't do. Okay, Africa from the gamers. For me, this is same level as Desert Fox, and nowhere near as cool. It's close, but it loses out to it just ever so slightly. Africa Corps by Avalon Hill, this always has a kind of warm spot for me. Now, it's not a game that I write off. This was not one of my early games. In fact, I avoided it for a long time because of the box cover and those stupid Rebuses on it. I thought, oh my god, I don't want to play this. This looks, like it's designed for kids not much younger than I am. In the end, I think it's kind of a cute game. I played it on the video. It doesn't feel like a real war game, though. It feels like too much of a gamey type situation. Ambush. I'm going to get to this eventually. I finally got a complete set. My original set that I bought from Victor Games, from a store, and had 2 copies of the same map, and I did not know how, and was not the most assertive person to get my map replaced, and I just put it off and ended up with this sad spot in my heart where there was this game that I really liked, but I couldn't play more than a few of the scenarios, and it wasn't just the maps, it turned out. Enzio, I struggled my way through playing this. This is not a big favorite of mine. It's another one of them early Avalon Hill operational games without a lot to recommend it. Kind of unpleasant, thick counters, mounted board. I didn't like that whole setup. That really was distasteful to me across the board. It felt, again, maybe not as sophisticated as the paperboards did for whatever reason. Kind of garish graphics on these guys. Just physically, component-wise, they did not appeal to me the way the SPI games did. You could say the GDW ones kind of had their issues too, and they did a certain dullness to them, but I preferred them as well. Avalon Hill was always the bottom of the rank for me on components. Is that the only thing going here? No, it was a very simplistic game. Takes a lot of time. Nothing too complex in it. Would be okay, but I don't want to play something that big, that long, that's that simple. And that's kind of what The Longest Day probably is like too. Battle of the Bulge by Avalon Hill. Put it in the same category, except it's playable length. Kind of fun, but not something I would try to play very often. I have Battleship in here for some reason, the old Milton Bradley one. Interesting story on that. I used to cheat at that by moving the ships around. But I would keep track of all the bullet spots, where it was only when I played against my father where he had already fired, so I would know where to slip my ship and he couldn't see it. And I did that like maybe 2 times, in part because I was thinking in my head it would be cool if you could move ships, not just, but because I wanted to cheat. But then I revealed it to him, and he was like, I would have never guessed. He ended up catching my brother cheating many years later. He's much younger than I am, because he's not as clever. He didn't figure out, I'm only going to cheat if I can't possibly be caught. Avalon Hill's Bismarck. This is a game where you have a couple of little battle boards, and you're searching for the Bismarck as it breaks out. Really, really nice, intricate systems in here. I ended up rating this quite highly, like a 9, because I was so impressed with the system that it had. It ends up moving to a battle board when you have ship versus ship combat, but most of the game is really plain searching for the Bismarck. You've got subs and all kind of other stuff going on in the background, though, to make it interesting. I have Burma 2, OCS game, which I played and actually pushed through the introductory scenario to learn it, and then played the campaign, and had a fairly good time with it, actually. The biggest impressive thing about it for me is how well written the rules are, though. But also it convinced me, hey, if I like this, I'm going to just start buying some of these games. And I picked up some of the others, Enemy at the Gates, DAC, some of the older ones, Guderian's Blitzkrieg, the original. Not with any idea of putting them all together or having the top best ones out there. No, just kind of with I want to play some of these, and let's get some feel for it. And if I have to translate the rules over, maybe that's a possibility, but if not, I can play with the old rules. Casino. This is an SPI magazine game, Assaulting the Gustav Line. This is kind of an interesting little tactical scenario where you've got the Germans holding a town, and and the Italians, and a monastery on the top of a hill. It's really, really hard to get to the top of the hill, especially with mechanized and armored cars and stuff. And I only played it a couple of times. Interesting situation. Didn't really grip me, being, World War II. DAC, I already mentioned this. North Africa campaign is sort of my fun area in World War II at this point. That's the only game that really caught me was Desert Fox, and Trail of the Fox was not as good for me because of the component issue. TSR just couldn't do maps and counters after they took over. If Their Fuhrer, this is a political game. Very simple, cheap game where where you're trying to win the elections in Germany, and one of the players happens to be the Nazis, and you also have communists, and you can take not just political actions, but also paramilitary type actions to try to win these elections. It's an interesting little light game. I give it a fairly low rating at 6, but I don't know. Desert Fox Trail of the Fox, to me this was a seminal game. I may be mistaken about, but nobody's slammed me on it, about the origin of sort of the good supply rules. But my feeling is that this is the game that Richard Berg wrote after Campaign for North Africa. He learned what he needed to about how to get, how to make supply work right in all that detail in Campaign North Africa, and then said, okay, now let's make it playable. And this is what resulted. This is a brilliant game. The supply system is not very far from what the OCS ended up settling on. It's got a little bit of cuteness to it where supplies can flip from mobile to immobile side, but to me it feels very, very much directly in the same line. And it's funny because then in the SCS, Rock of the Marne, the designer went into, I think I'm the first person who came up with artillery being shifts in combat. Everything in this game, especially artillery, is shifts in combat. And in some ways the combat table reminds me a little of the OCS too, but only really in the sense of we've got something innovative here. This one was really cute because it's so based on the morale factor, and I really am looking forward to bringing this one to the table. This has been a long-time favorite of mine. Desert Wars, SPI game, tactical armored combat, pre-plotted movement. I don't remember it, but I don't remember I remember it enough to remember not really being too pleased by it. I did Empire of the Sun GMT. This was actually a surprising game to me. As a CDG, it has some of the same flaws that I feel CDGs have for me, but it looked like an interesting way to get the major decisions in the naval campaign. And honestly, if I wanted to sit down and play something a few times, this would actually be one of the games that I would think about, because I really want to get a grasp of that naval thinking, and I think this was the right game to pull that in. Right now I'm playing, as I mentioned, or I've just set up, I haven't actually started, the Axis Empire's Total Krieg and Die Senso. And naval rules always are such a problem for me, but that game is just almost inaccessible. I've reached down to the old Total Krieg. I'm going to try to read the rules to that, just to try to get a feeling for, hey, what are all these markers I'm placing meant to represent exactly? What is it I'm doing here? What's my motivation for making these plays? Because currently the Axis Empire's rules are just so sparse, and there will be a video for that soon. Enemy at the Gates, the good old version. France 1940, and I haven't played it. I just have cards for it for some reason. France 1940. I have the Avalon Hill reprint of the SPI game. I actually vaguely enjoyed it for a game of its level, but very, very simple. Brings you right to easy decisions right away, where you roll some dice, you get to fight, and you get to do what that sort of classic wargaming was all about. Global War. This is Advanced Third Reich and Empire of the Rising Sun. I have WWII. I've played it a couple of times. I was always torn between, is this or is WWII the system I wanted? Now, since I owned this, I stayed away from buying WWII until somebody could convince me otherwise. Well, nobody convinced me otherwise, but I've gotten stupid and bought lots of things. Right now, I've got kind of, and then Total Krieg and Die Senso was the, okay, I'll give something else a shot. The biggest thing that this holds for me is consistent, or more consistent level of detail. WWII, I fear, too often dives into way too much detail on one thing or another. And this was actually the issue with European Theater of Operations, World War II, the TSR Bruce. I think it may have been an SPI thing reprinted refurbished. Too many times with leaders in flames, boats in flames, tanks in flames, rebels in flames, oil refineries in flames, whatever they wanted to add, every little thing in additional detail. Planes went into way more detail. If the original design wasn't clean cut to begin with, and it wasn't, the addition of all these expansions didn't help at all. I feel like A3R and Empire of the Rising Sun did a fairly consistent level across the board. You might argue, okay, the planes and the boats are a little too abstracted. I don't think that's the case, actually. And to tell you the truth, I think the Totaler Krieg takes it a little further and abstracts them even more, to the point where, all right, I'm beginning to feel like the ground units are a little too detailed in that game. So this one actually holds a lot for me because of that consistency. And one of the interesting, it gives you a lot of options. Not just, I'm going to attack this country or this country, but you have all these technological paths to follow and diplomatic paths, etc. So it gives you much of the experience that maybe a WIF or a Totaler Krieg gives you, where the original Third Reich didn't. This set, I think, brings it into that worldwide feel. Bulgarian's Blitzkrieg, Hitler's War. Now this is a special game. I rate this well, but it troubles me when I play it because I don't enjoy it very much usually. This is one that's very much at a high level of abstraction. Even the armies are at a level, well, the whole thing has this sort of singular level where you're trying to conquer territory, and usually it's by surrounding things, especially over on the East Front. Very, very mobile game over there. Very interesting, the kind of strategies you use there. What goes bad is when you start bringing the whole world in. The naval rules, they feel clunky to me. They feel like they're really not allowing the Germans, for example, to explore all the naval options in the way that I think they should have been able to in a game of this nature, where you can research technology and so many different things. It also felt like it kind of bogged down. So there's weird decisions in it. For example, if you don't build bombers and do the Battle of Britain, you may not have your interceptors cheap enough because you may not be able to take advantage of the advances that the British made during that. Just some weird decisions that I didn't like so much on it. But there's so much innovation in this. It's a fairly simple three-player game. Not terribly simple, but fairly simple three-player game where you can sit down and get that out, in 8-12 hours on a small table. Interesting idea. Ideology. I did a video on this sucker. Not big on my heart because it's a recent game. I was unimpressed, but I don't know how much more to talk about. Kursk. It's the SPI flat box sucker. Interesting game. Well, no, not interesting game. Yeah, it never really thrilled me that much. It felt like so many of the World War II games. Yeah, okay, so I've got exploitation movement. What is there to this game to make me interested? What am I picturing? And that's the problem. I don't picture in these big tank battles what's going on in the way that I can picture what's going on in, say, a Napoleonic battle. And I think that's really the difficulty. And over on the Pacific side, I can kind of picture the naval actions because they're more interesting to me. But I'm so unable to make decisions in a reasonable fashion in a naval game. I'm gonna skip London's Burning. I've played it once. I barely remember it. It's a solitaire game, and I played it not long ago, but I have no memory of it at all. Luftwaffe. Yeah, this is Allied strategic bombing, and you pre-plot your bombing raids. German fighters can sortie out, and eventually it adds production training, historical limitations on the German doctrine. It's an interesting system. I think it's kind of cute to play, but could never be a favorite. Midway, this is one that I really love. Out of all the Avalon Hill classics, and I know I said this kind of about Africa Corps, but this is the one that I probably like the most in reality. This I picked up early, and you're secretly searching for the enemy ships. It's a simple system. It's not like Bismarck, or at least not like the modern Bismarck. And you launch your planes to attack, and if you get caught with your planes loaded with fuel and bombs on them, you're in a lot of trouble. So you may want to launch an attack just to prevent that, and maybe attack a smaller force. I had a lot of fun with this back when I was younger. I haven't played it much since then. Victory Games Omaha Beachhead. This, I think, is kind of an underrated little game. I've only played it a couple of times, but I remember it really kind of impressing me. And you'd think, hey, it's a Victory Games game. Why did you not play it very much? I don't know. I really don't. I played most of their games a lot more. Origins of World War II. This was probably my first, not war game, but kind of weird game other than, say, the 3M ones. I had to have gotten this at a very young age, tag sale purchase, and I was already, after playing this, I was making up war games because of the CRT. And it was just such an exciting thing. Pacific War, I've got to get to. I don't know when it's going to happen because it's a monster, it's a true monster. But I don't feel like my wargaming credentials are really complete without having given that or War in the Pacific a real shot, and I've done neither. All right, what about Panzer this, that, and the other? I've got Panzer Blitz, Panzer Leader. ArabIsraeli Wars is in the same boat, but we can leave that alone for a little bit. I put Squad Leader in the same boat too, though. You know, these geomorphic, I can fight this battle, that, you know, that's an abstraction of, you know, something, just a stand-in, not even an abstraction, a stand-in for some action that happened on the West Front during the Normandy invasions. And I'll have some historical units that would have likely been available, the right kind of tanks, the right kind of heavier weapons and stuff. And just set up these kind of balanced, but essentially fabricated scenarios. And that never hit me at all well. And again, the components hit me here. Avalon Hill stuff, the counters, nothing terrible about them, but they didn't grasp me the way the SPI ones did. And the awful folding mounted boards with the stupid dots in the center. They weren't attractive to me. OSG's Panzerkrieg. This was something of a, to me it's like Kursk, maybe a little bit more interesting. Very simple system. Air power is abstracted. It really detailed the exploitation and breakthroughs in a way that there's nothing else in the game. So it puts the focus entirely on it. Plot to assassinate Hitler. I did this on video. This was kind of a little bit of fun. Felt more like an armored combat game than a political game to me. But, yeah. Rommel in Tunisia. Okay, this is one of my bugaboos. I rated this well largely because of the ambition in this game. Not terribly well. I gave it a 6. I think it's kind of a flawed game. It doesn't play terribly well. It's not a lot of fun. But this is also an OSG game, and it felt like sort of a precursor to Desert Fox and Trail of the Fox in terms of, again, a little too complex, a little bit too much of these little details that you have to worry about to get things working. But I don't know. I could see playing it a few times, getting used to it, and being more comfortable. Shanghai Trader, another recent pickup. This was I did this on video. This was something I wanted for a long time. I was less impressed with it than maybe I had led myself to believe. Another one coming up, Warlords, same company, Panther. I think I like a little better, but I haven't played that in a long time. Sink the Bismarck. This was a lousy ripoff of Avalon Hill's Bismarck. I see little or nothing to promote this. You take away the hidden movement, the double blind movement. Take away all the interesting stuff, really. It just was very similar otherwise, maybe because of just the topic, but it did not interest me much at all. Spies. Yeah, this is a game that could be a lot of fun, but never really managed to be as much fun as I think people hoped it would. I've got a playing here. Nobody really seemed to like it terribly much. Nobody disliked it too much either. You basically have these secret counters that you're trying to steal from one another and bring back home, and you cash them in. And at the same time, you have these event counters that you play that help you control the flow of Europe for stealing these secrets. It just, I don't know, didn't work out as well as maybe it felt like it should. Spitfire, this is SPI's air combat for World War II. It's non-simultaneous movement. I was unimpressed with it. I don't remember much about it. Squad Leader, again, I put this in the same boat as the Panzer Blitz Panzer Leader. Although I had a lot of fun. I learned ASL and played Red Barricades, and I had a lot more fun with that. Maybe putting Squad Leader within the big campaign size thing makes it more enjoyable to me. Stalingrad. I've got this rated as crap. I don't know why. Like lower than I would expect. Maybe it was just a little too simple. Alright, let's finish up the rest of World War II. We got Tunisia, another one of the gamers ones. The only one I want more than that is probably Sicily. I saw both of them played at Constant World. They look really, really pretty. And kind of smaller and more manageable. Tito. Tito was one of the vids that got a lot of attention early on in my videoing. This is a game that nobody really likes, or nobody really liked back in the day. I mean, it got a horrible rating. And lots of boxes available of it at KB for whatever reason. And I always kind of liked it. It was innovative, interesting little ideas. May not have been completely balanced. I'm not sure, but it gave some interesting choices and a different kind of play than most of the S&T games that were coming out. Got a lot of solitaire plays for me. Total or Krieg. Yeah, that's sort of what I'm working on. Victory in the Pacific, otherwise known as Dice in the Pacific. This is the War.wmv system. I've heard really bad things about War.wmv itself. dice at sea. But in this case, I think it's a somewhat more interesting game. The only problem I have with it is there's this kind of flow where the Japanese expand and grab lots of points for the first half of the game, and then the Americans expand and take those points away. And really the goal is to get it past the 0 mark. As the U.S. player, you want to have more points, that you've collected during your time. So the question becomes, when can you get that tipping point in points? And that becomes an economy of force question. You put your navies, out to get maximum points, you may take some additional attrition as the Japanese, and then lose more points in the long run because of it. Might be best in its simplest version. There's a lot of optional rules that I usually play with, though, of course. Just covering a lot of different factors. Kamikazes and all that. The Victory in the West system. I picked up Patton's Third Army for this too. I had Grenade in Sicily. Grenade was one of the earlier games I had. Cute system where you have these hidden counters to indicate the strength of the unit. Grenade had a really hideous map though, and in and of itself that may have prevented me from playing it very often. I mean, facing something ugly is just not pleasing. It's so nice to have a beautiful map set up, especially a large one. Not that Grenade is big. Sicily had a much prettier map. Unfortunately, my copy got damaged by being down the basement for too long and took some mold hit. I tried to replace most of the counters, and I think I've got a mostly workable game, but I think I'm still a little behind on some of them. It was a much more interesting situation to me, although both actually have an interesting game situation. In Grenade's case, you have the flooding of the Ruhr, which serves as kind of this delay for when the American troops can try to cross. And in Sicily, you have competition and a race between the English and American forces. I haven't tried Patton's Third Army yet. I don't know how that's going to play out, but I had to pick it up just to fill out the series, just like I have with Central Front series. Warlords, China in Disarray. This is the other Panther game I have, and I think they've only produced 2. They may have produced a straight war game as well. This has a couple of scenarios in it. The first one is this 4-player kind of feudal warlords competing over the breakup of the empire. And very, very kind of equally balanced, 4 people cutting political deals, simplistic military simulation on that side of it. The second uses the same basic military rules, but you're looking at not just the 4 warlords, but Japan, the KMT, and the communists all being involved in it as well. And that creates a much, much less balanced situation, but I think a more interesting game. Unfortunately, it's unlikely that everybody's going to be involved in it at the same time. So the communists start off fairly weak, but then probably a couple of warlords are going to be knocked out fairly early. I've given this a fairly good rating. Everybody who's played it gave it a good rating. I don't know why such high ratings. Winter War, this was the SPI game covering the Russo-Finnish War. It's got some interesting little political options in it. Maybe, I don't remember remember if you roll a die to see, whether Sweden jumps in or something like that. Or if there are options to do that. I remember this being a very, very clean operational World War II game and a lot of fun. And I've given it only a 6, but I seem to remember favoring it more than some of the others. Wolfpack, I don't know what to say about this. It's an SPI solitaire game. I've played it, there's no question. I just don't remember. I've given it a bad rating of 4, and I don't remember showing anything of great interest. All right, I think I'm gonna jump into the Cold War stuff as well here. I know you could say, well, I don't know if that makes sense because World War II is already long, but I have almost nothing on the Cold War itself. I've got Air War, which I have not played yet, and tell myself I should. Arab-Israeli Wars, which is Panzer Leader, Panzer Blitz, translated over to the Arab-Israeli conflicts. I've barely played this, and I think I actually gave it a higher rating than most of those. So, Falklands, this is by Mayfair Games. The first game of it is a World War I game using hidden movement for the Germans and a fairly simple combat system. And I thought it was kind of a little bit of fun. I gave it a 7, actually. I had some real enjoyment with that. The second one, though, is the main selling point on this, which was the Argentinian conflict with Britain in the 80s. The combat system's simple, but it's a huge buckets of dice system. Really, really was obnoxious in terms of how much rolling you did. And that ended up getting a significantly lower rating from me. Strangely, it looks like my wife rated it higher. Korean War, I did the vid for this. This is one of my real treasures. I've rated it a 9. Nobody else has rated it particularly well out of my group. So it ends up with kind of a crappy 5.75. One of the problems with it is it's very, very hard to play the Americans and survive. And when I look at the people who've rated it, I suspect that they had real trouble coping with it from my memory. For me, it's a great game, and I've definitely enjoyed it more than most things that I've seen in this kind of modern era. Sinai, this was an SPI, little operational game for simulating a couple of the Arab-Israeli Wars. Actually, I have it listed as strategic, but I think it's not. Fairly simple game, and not a lot much more to say about it, really. Twilight Struggle, I did the vids on this. I need to do another set of vids on this game, but because, that was just a first playthrough. I've played it several times since then. I like it. I think it's a pretty decent CDG to cover the period. I don't see it why it's the number 1 game of all, but it's very tough for me to accept that anything modern can be ranked above some of the real classics. So that's, I just can't see how, say, Go wouldn't be the number 1 game, or chess. It doesn't make sense to me. And Twilight Struggle, I think it's, an interesting and okay game. I rank it about the same as 1960. Hearts and Minds I did a video of. I thought this was actually a pretty interesting little Vietnam game. If you don't have the time to break something huge out like the next one, Victory Games is Vietnam. Well, this gave the rules were kind of painful. Some issues with the components, etc. But overall, I thought it was one of the more interesting of the CDGs that I've played, especially on the light end of them. And I would say Twilight Struggle is also one of the more interesting, lighter CDGs that I've seen. Vietnam, this is a game I've caught some flack for because I really believe, it's unwinnable by the U.S., and that the little modifications that were suggested might make it winnable by the U.S., but only by taking ahistorical tactics. For some reason, this has a really terrible rating. Only my wife and I rated it, and my ex-wife and I. I figured one of my friends who loved it would have gotten this rating in on it. So we played it a couple of times. Yeah, the way it's set up. Anyway, for the campaign game, you're basically trying to keep the population pacified, and you have this huge bookkeeping chore of keeping track of every single population unit throughout all the different territories, and there are a lot of them. The actual play of the game is very, very fluid. The U.S. player has a hard time. They can go in if they have if they bring sufficient force and go wherever the hell they like. But if they bring any significant force, the VC has an option to get out of there. And when the NVA comes in, they're much more fragile. They're not able to just disappear and run away in the same manner. But their goal is kind of to cause enough casualties to drive the U.S. into having to leave Vietnam. Anyway, the way it all works out, I found that any kind of escalation of U.S. Forces that was significant, not just relying largely on the ARVN to do your fighting, ended up leaving you out of the war way too early. Had the U.S. usually getting knocked out around 1970 instead of when they should have. Then I have Liberia, which I did a video for. This is a Counter-Strike game. I didn't give this a very good rating at all. Component-wise, they're cheap little Counter-Strike games. They're not going to be excellent components. But I found them particularly annoying in terms of, actually using the components where they're covering up all the little chart locations, etc. It was just very unpleasant to keep track of the information you need to in the game using the components that were given. More disturbing to me, though, because I have a couple of these Counter-Strike games, is the combat system, where you get to kind of pick how many dice you want to roll. And that seems a little weird to me. There's something clever about it until you start thinking, wait a minute, I'm fighting harder, but I don't show up at all? What? And that kind of would disagree with me. I don't know what of the rest of it I'm going to get through. Probably take a bit of a break from this because it's hitting me. I've got a little pile of modern and fictional games and future that I'll probably hit next. Then we would push through and try to get through the fantasy and science fiction stuff. Largely, though, this is going to stop being a walk through history and becoming a walk through a history. All right, let's load this one up.